Thank you very much, Speaker. It's my pleasure to join debate today on a very important public safety issue in the province of Ontario, and that's on Bill 163, protecting a woman's right to access services. I want to thank all my colleagues, too, in the Progressive Conservative Caucus for supporting this bill and supporting my public comments and also my desire to have expedited this piece of legislation. And so I would just like to point out that a couple of Thursdays ago, I rose in the House and said, let's move this first, second, third reading, let's expedite it, just to make sure that by that Thursday afternoon, by lunch, all women in Ontario would have would have safety precautions put in place for them if they went to try to receive or were going to receive a legal medical procedure in the province of Ontario, which is funded. That didn't happen. The Liberals, I think, they wanted to play a couple little political games in order to create some divisions. But that was okay because we said that's fine. If you want to pursue this, we'll still support it. And if you want to come forward after the break week, we were happy to engage in an expedited process. And so I will note this before I continue my remarks, that despite extra debate and bringing folks to Queen's Park, even by teleconference, there were no amendments to the bill. So we're all supporting the bill as it is, as it was laid here in first and second reading. So I wanted to point that out, Speaker, that despite deciding to lengthen this process by an extra couple of weeks, nothing has changed in this bill whatsoever. So that, I think, is very important. The second thing I must say, and I'll be very open about this, I have received a lot, not a lot, but a bit of criticism for supporting this piece of legislation from people who are pro-life. And my colleague, I thought she made a really great point, my colleague Peggy Sattler, who said, you know, this really is, you know, we respect their views, and I certainly do, Speaker. I certainly respect their view of being pro-life. I happen to be pro-choice, but I'm not overly enthused about abortion. But I do believe that a woman has a right to choose, and I fundamentally believe that. And I fundamentally believe that if that is her choice to choose an abortion, then she should be safe in doing so. That she should not fear for her security, and that she should not fear harassment or intimidation. So again, I also don't view this as a pro-choice or pro-life narrative. I believe this is a pro-women's safety narrative, and to access something that is perfectly legal in the province of Ontario. But I have received criticism, and I've been called less than a Christian. I've been called less than a conservative. But I can tell you fundamentally, good Christians respect other people, and good conservatives respect other people. And so I will tell you, Speaker, I am proud to stand and speak on this bill as a Christian and a conservative, and I'll have nobody ever challenge me on either of those points. And if they do, I suppose, just like one of the ladies that lives in Ottawa Centre said she was going to run a conservative against me, good luck with that. Really good luck with that. We're standing here today on a fundamental issue of safety and security for women. And, you know, the last time I checked, Conservatives stand for law and order. So the last time I checked, I've always stood for law and order, and this is a law and order bill put forward by the Attorney General. So I'm supporting law and order, and I wanted to be very clear about that today. The one other thing I wanted to point out today is I had the opportunity on the weekend to, as many of us did, be part of a number of different events in our communities. I typically like to go to about 14 events on the weekend. No exception on Saturday, where I started my morning at about 8:30 and coached hockey. I left there and I went to an opening of a realtor's office. There were about 100 people there. I then spent 2 hours canvassing in Half Moon Bay in my constituency of Nepean. After that, I went to, and I'm going to list them all, but I went to a Diwali event. I then went to the Amazing Persons Gala. I went to the Barhaven Scottish Rugby Club, and there's a point to all this, Speaker. I left there, I went to a food cupboard event, and then I finished my night off at a Diwali. I ended up getting home at 11:30. Why am I telling you this? Because for all of those trolls on social media who decided they were going to attack me and have these fake names, my constituents applauded me for taking a stand. A lot of men, because they have daughters or they have a wife, and a lot of women told me they had been in that same situation one time before and they had been harassed. And they thanked me, and they thanked me privately, off in a corner where they gave me a hug and a kiss on the cheek. So for anybody that wants to make this an issue and try to be polarizing, sending vitriol over this issue, you know, you're not really thinking about other people. You're trying to intimidate them. So for all the people that I saw from 8:30 in the morning until 11:30 at night on Saturday, which was probably several hundred people, Speaker, all I had were people thanking me for taking a stand because they thought that this bill is about common decency. Common decency. In fact, one would argue if we were actually decent to one another, we wouldn't need such a piece of legislation. But we do, because we know, for example, in the city of Ottawa, where I represent, this has been a common issue of continued harassment against women who are seeking a legal procedure which is funded by our government. This is not up for debate. The safety of every person in our society is fundamentally why we are here, for law and order. And if people or individuals want to challenge that law and order, then we must, as a society, and we must, as a legislature, put parameters in place to protect people, and that is why we are here today. And that's why I'm pleased to support this piece of legislation. That's why when people want to challenge me on this, I remind them that being decent is something that I want to pursue. I read on the weekend something that was very important to me when I was younger. I grew up as a young progressive conservative in the province of Nova Scotia. My dad was elected for 30 years, and he was a campaign manager to many conservatives over the years, including the former Premier John Hamm, was a regional organizer for my cousin and his cousin, Donald Cameron, who was Premier of Nova Scotia. He ran campaigns for Peter and Elmer MacKay. My mother is an elder in the Presbyterian Church, and that's something we're quite proud of. In fact, she's an elder with my cousin Donnie, who was the Premier, and now they go to this church, St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Glasgow, Nova Scotia. And growing up, my father was a very proud progressive conservative, and he reminded me that over the years, and he's passed now for 10 years, but he reminded me over the years that he was the youth chair for Robert Stanfield. And he would then go to his first convention ever was to support Joe Clark in the 70s, and then of course many years later, Joe Clark's second trip around the sun there, I got to work for him in 1998 to 2000. In any event, I want to digress for a moment because I was provided with a copy of what it means to be a conservative from it was written by Robert Stanfield, and it was comments to the Conservative caucus of the day. And it was provided to me by a dear family friend, Senator Michael Forrestal, who has now passed, and whom my husband worked for over a decade. And Michael obviously was from Nova Scotia and knew my family quite well, was the executive director of the party, of the Progressive Conservative Party, when Robert Stanfield was Premier, and my cousin, my great uncle, was also in that cabinet. And I read it, and it talked about, as conservatives, and I think this is really fundamental for anybody that's watching this, it's fundamental as a conservative to build a party that doesn't polarize or pit groups in society against one another. No, in fact, what Robert Stanfield effectively said in this memo is that a Conservative caucus must represent all facets of the country, all facets of a province, from people from all walks of life. We do not polarize against and pit one another against each other. And I must say, Speaker, and I think it's important as we speak to this bill, for too long I think there has been an eager desire on the part of the left to use abortion as a wedge issue for Conservatives to divide us. And so I'm here to actually counter that and say that is an old tactic that was first used by Jean Chrétien in 1997. It was really perfected during the time of the Canadian Alliance with Stockwell Day, and the Liberals were able to manipulate that. So here we are 25 years later, and I think that the current government's motivation on this was to do just the same. But I'm here to tell you that regardless if you are on the social conservative aspect or you're on my side, which is the progressive conservative aspect, there's a voice for everyone in this party. And that's why I'm very pleased that our leader, Patrick Brown, has adopted that mentality, and that's why we're here today talking to people. Doesn't matter who you love, where you're from, it doesn't matter where you worship. You have a home here. And this debate is very important because it allows for me, as a female progressive conservative who has been in the party since I was basically born, as a progressive conservative from the Red Tory tradition in Atlantic Canada, to stand alongside those who may not share my views. But we are progressive conservatives. None of us are less so because we share different ideas on some social issues. I think fundamentally we all agree on the issues of fiscal conservatism, law and order. We believe in accountability. And so the attempts to divide us, I think, were woefully inadequate in this particular regard, and I think my caucus colleagues would agree. And I think, too, when we have this discussion, I think it's important that we always are mindful of the people that we're trying to protect here. And the people we're trying to protect here, and the person that I think in my mind is the 18-year-old girl who may not have access to abortion in her community, may have to drive 2 hours, may have to use a circle of her friends in order to get access to this, and is too ashamed to tell her family that she got pregnant. And so she may have to travel by bus for 2 hours to get access, and she's probably terrified. She's a young child, effectively herself at 18 years old, and without the protection of her mom or her dad, or perhaps even her partner, and is walking through to try and access something that is perfectly legal, not illegal, perfectly legal, government funded, and to try and walk into a clinic only to be harassed by somebody who doesn't know her, doesn't understand her story, doesn't understand where she came from or how she got there. They don't understand a thing about her. They just want to harass her. Their views are perfectly fine. But they're not fine if you're going to intimidate another person. They're not fine if you're harassing someone. They're not fine if you're scaring somebody who's already vulnerable. So that's why I supported this bill, and without hesitation supported this bill, and spoke to our party. And I'm just pleased that my caucus colleagues, and in particular my leader, took my position and took my view, and believe that that's what we're here to do. We're not trying to encourage people to have abortions. We're not trying to discourage people from having abortions. We're simply saying if you choose to have an abortion, you should be safe in trying to access that perfectly legal medical procedure. That's what this bill is about. And I'm happy to stand on the floor of the Assembly and have that conversation. I'm happy to join the debate. I'm a woman. I'm a mother. I have a daughter. I coach an all-female girls hockey team. I sit in the Assembly with about 30% women in this Assembly, where we have female leaders, female deputy leaders, female heads of committees. If we can't have this conversation without breaking into a fight, then, well, we shouldn't be breaking into a fight. I think it's common sense. It's common decency, Speaker. And so that's the tradition that I've grown up in, and it's certainly the tradition I've been part of on the floor of this House. I would urge, though, and I would caution the continued polarization and volatility in matters where we know that there will be emotion-based responses. And I've seen it twice in the last 2 weeks. And I've had the privilege of being able to stand in the Assembly on some what shouldn't be controversial issues, but they end up being controversial issues because the government believes that they can wedge my party and drag us. And then, of course, by speaking out and being somebody, then I get harassed. But the thing is, the difference between me and the 18-year-old girl that I'm talking about is I don't have to put up with the harassment. And I'm strong enough to put people in their place. And I'm not afraid of hitting the delete or the block button. And I don't need to return phone calls from people who harass me. And I have a good circle of people that can support me. And I have a loud enough voice and a strong enough voice that I can fight back. But there are girls and women in this province that don't have the support that I do. And so if they decide they want to do something that might be deemed controversial, or something that they don't necessarily want to talk about, well, then it's all up to us in bills like this to say that we will stand firmly behind them and we will put the necessary precautions in place. Now, I know when I go up to my office, I'll have a couple of emails. I'll probably be nailed on Facebook and Twitter too. I just bring it, right? Seriously. I know that what we're doing here is the right thing for the right reasons. It's unfortunate that the bill didn't come from that place. It became a source for wedge politics, but that's fine. We're going to continue to make sure that we stand up for vulnerable people, whomever they are. And as Robert Stanfield once wrote, we will stand up for people from all walks of life, regardless of where they come from. Because a true political party, and I would urge the Liberals to listen to this too, because they should also welcome the views of an entire spectrum of people. And so with that, I want to thank my colleagues who sat in committee because I was unable to attend committee. I was pleased to have my leader in my community, so my colleague Lisa Thompson, as well as my colleague Gila Marteau, carried the ball in committee, and I appreciate them doing that work because most people know, Speaker, in the Legislative Assembly, a lot of the work that gets done isn't really necessarily on the floor of this Assembly. It is by the hardworking people who sit in the committees as MPPs, and of course the people on our staff. I'd also like to say thank you to my constituents who told me unequivocally this weekend that it was the right thing to do. And I can tell you, Speaker, it didn't matter if they were a young rugby player. It didn't matter if they were an elderly farmer. It didn't matter if they were a mom on a hockey team. They really got this, they really got this. They understood it. Now, maybe, Speaker, it's because in Ottawa it's very prevalent, so we were hearing about it on the news for over a year. Maybe it's because this issue has spoken to people. You know, people don't regularly walk around saying, "Oh, I had an abortion." They don't. If they did, they're holding that in. They might feel shame, they might feel remorse, I don't know. But they don't often just go up to you and say, "It was me." So I don't know when the people came up to me this weekend, if there was personal experience. It's not my place to ask, but I certainly can tell you that this is an issue that for those who are seeking to access these services, they should be able to do so, not only protecting their privacy, but also protecting their personal safety. And so with that, Speaker, my time is limited, and I just wanted to say that, of course, we will be supporting this today, and I'm pleased that I had the opportunity to have this conversation. And perhaps now that we've had a reasonable discussion on this in the Legislative Assembly, that we can all be better people with respect to these issues of social conscience, and we can respect one another. The final thing I want to say is when I was in university, one of my classmates, who I thought was always much more intelligent than me, much more brighter, she once said, I was taught to respect, not necessarily accept another person's point of view. And Speaker, when it comes to these issues of social conscience, I think that we would all be better to understand we all come from different places, and we must respect the other person, but we don't have to accept their point of view. And in this debate, I hope that those who disagree with me and my colleagues who have spoken on this bill, that they will respect that we have a different opinion than them, but they don't have to accept our opinion of pro-choice or pro-life. So, I would just like to leave an olive branch for everybody on all the different sides of this, just to understand that there is respect, not necessarily exception. Thank you.